And this recording will be available on our website where the applications are posted. So that's where you can find this or send it to anyone in your agency that might need to see it as well.
Cool. So yeah, we're recording now. So thanks for coming, everyone, to the Salt Lake City 2022-2023 fiscal year federal grant application training. So we'll do really quick introductions with the city staff. So I'm Ethan Sellers. I'm the Community Development Grant Administrator. So I work with the CDBG and HOPWA grants.
And I'm Amanda.best. I am the Housing Development Program Specialist. So I work with home and the ESG grants.
Hey everyone, Tony Melner, Deputy Director of the Housing Stability Division. I just wanted to say welcome everyone and thank you so much for your interest in applying for the city's federal grants for the upcoming year. And you're possibly partnering with the city to do some good work for some low-income individuals. And with that, pass it back to Ethan and Amanda.
Cool. So yeah, I'll share my screen and we'll go through the presentation. So feel free to type any questions you have in the chat. Also, you could feel free to unmute yourself and kind of jump in with any questions as we're kind of finishing up a slide. Also, at the end, we'll have time for questions as well. So whichever you prefer. Okay, can everyone see this as a full screen?
Yep.
Cool. Let me know if there's questions because I can't see the chat now, so just as a heads up. Do you want to take this one, Amanda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is just going over some schedules of what is happening now and what's happening in the future. So right now we are doing the federal grant application training for the 22-23 fiscal year. And those applications opened up October 1st and they are closing November 1st. So you can find the link to that on our website at slc.gov/hand. We are the Housing Stability Division now, but the link still is hand. So that is the correct link, just so everyone knows. And all of the applications have to be done through Zoomgrants. So there's a link to Zoomgrants if you don't have a profile. We'll walk through that as well later. Go to the next slide. So part of the process is doing a general needs hearing, and that's happening November 2021. We don't have a date on that yet, but that will be done electronically. So if you have anyone that would want to participate in that, any member of the public, that's where we get public feedback. Ethan, do you have a date for that yet or no? Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay. And then in the winter time is when we review all of the applications with the CDCIP board, the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board, and the mayor. And then March 2022 is probably when they will go to public hearing with the council, and then the council will award funding probably March or April or May. May looks like the date that we have in there. And then we'll do a training on those that are awarded funding around June 2022. And then the start of the program year is July 2022. And it looks like we may have missed the fiscal year dates in the event. But that's supposed to say 22-23 grant recipient training and 22-23 program year. So. And then cool. Ethan, you can talk about these ones since these are your programs.
Yeah, so, and throughout a reminder, if you have any particular questions about these grants or the grants Amanda works with, we'll throw our emails up at the end and feel free to email us and we can talk kind of specific. If you have specific questions, just let us know. So yeah, CDBG or the Community Development Block Grant is a grant we receive annually from HUD. All these are. So there's two components to CDBG. There's public services, and then there's housing and neighborhood improvements. So when you go to Zoomgrants, you'll realize there's two different sections for CDBG. There's CDBG public services, and then the housing and neighborhood improvements. You are able to apply for both, but typically, depending on what your program is looking to do or fund, is where you'll kind of want to narrow that down. So CDBG public services is one of the most flexible grants that exist. So this can pay for things like staff salary, it can pay for client services, it can pay for client supplies, things like that. So it can pay for like a case manager position. It could hypothetically, if you're like a homeless shelter or a medical clinic for low-income individuals, homeless individuals, it can pay for like medical supplies. So it's pretty flexible. Just be aware that is the most competitive portion of our grant because a lot of agencies are applying for different services that I mentioned, but feel free to apply. And again, like open for any questions, but that can cover a lot of different components. Whereas the housing and neighborhood improvements, so what we mean by housing is more in kind of housing hard costs. So that could be acquiring a building to turn into affordable housing. It could be rehabilitating a building, say like an old motel, and turning that into affordable housing. And that rehabilitation is pretty broad. It can pay for like utility hookups, contractor fees, or the actual cost of doing the rehabilitation. And then also there's some components with, emergency home repair. You can do down payment assistance, some mortgage assistance with CDBG as well in housing. So that's pretty flexible. And then additionally, we also have neighborhood improvements. This is a little more specific. So we have these outlined in our comp plan, what you can do, but generally our current consolidated plan that we run for 5 years outlines transportation projects. So that could be, like bus stop improvements, bike access, things like that. And then HOPWA, or the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS or HIV, is a program specifically designed for homeless individuals or individuals diagnosed with HIV or AIDS. So that's really the main requirement, that they have that diagnosis. And you can do case management services, which are called supportive services. You can do tenant-based rental assistance, kind of like a rapid rehousing program, or like their deposit, mortgage, rent, or utility, and then some the case management services to get them into housing. I'll pass this over to you, Amanda.
Great. So ESG is primarily for low-income or homeless individuals. That one is specifically for street outreach, homeless prevention, emergency shelter, and rapid rehousing. It's our smallest pot of money that we get. So if you do any of those sorts of things with your agency, if you have any questions, let me know, but that's primarily what it's for, that it's prioritized for some of those specific things. And then home is down payment assistance, tenant-based rental assistance, and the home development fund, which is open right now. If you are planning on developing any sort of affordable housing, that is a separate application, that home development fund. But that money is awarded each annual year and then adds into that fund. I did want to make a plug for home. If you are wanting to do any sort of rapid rehousing or tenant-based rental assistance, home is a really good option if you have tried to use ESG or even CDBG public services. Home has a lot more capacity for that. And we can award more than we have been in the past simply from just pulling from the home development fund amount. So if you're interested in doing any sort of rapid rehousing or rental assistance in the community, definitely reach out and I can talk with you about if that program works with home and how that works. It's a little bit more complicated than ESG, but it's still a really great program. ESG, the income requirements is 30% AMI or homeless, and that can be used throughout the entire county of Salt Lake, whereas home is up to 60% AMI for rental assistance, 80% AMI for down payment assistance or any sort of home buyer assistance, and that can only be used in Salt Lake City boundaries.
And I apologize, I didn't clarify the components of CDBG like Amanda just did for her grants. So CDBG is anyone in Salt Lake City can be served as long as they meet the AMI threshold. So that's anyone under 80% area median income. And then so they don't inherently have to be homeless, they just need to be lower to moderate income. And then HOP was also 80% area median income. But this is the Salt Lake Metropolitan Statistical Area. So that includes Salt Lake County, Tooele County, and Summit County. And then with qualifying beneficiaries, so kind of what we were just talking about. So there is the income requirements, but then each of the grants has a little more further specificity with who can be served. So with CDBG, if you're doing one of the hard cost transportation projects, like I mentioned, it does need to be completed in one of our low income census tracts or the West Side target area. So I have a map for that. However, if you're applying for public services or one of the housing programs, it isn't inherently tied to that target area. So, you know, for example, if you're providing a service to low-income individuals, your service doesn't need to be specifically in that low-income target area. That's just for spending our hard cost dollars. So presumed benefit. So this is if you're applying for housing and public services within CDBG. This is where it's really broad. It could be victims of domestic violence, homeless individuals, illiterate adults, severely disabled individuals, households experiencing food insecurity. And that's not a complete list. That's just kind of an example. So it's, again, it's very broad in who it can serve. Just there needs to be some sort of presumed benefit that you're serving a vulnerable and low-income population. And then I'll do the Hopwood blurb. So kind of like I just mentioned, as long as the individuals are diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, it can benefit individuals and their families in Salt Lake, Tooele, or Summit counties.
Yeah, I think I got a little bit ahead of the slides when I was talking about beneficiaries. But this says basically the same thing. So ESG, it depends on what category you're applying for. So when it comes to street outreach or rapid rehousing, you will just need to see if that person is homeless or at risk of homelessness. And then if you're doing any sort of homeless prevention, then they would have to meet the income requirement of 30% AMI or under 30% AMI. And there are specific definitions of homelessness noted in ESG. So if you're working within HIMIS, things like that, then those are the participants that would be considered homeless, or if there's a certification from another provider. And then for home, that really is just income-based and location-based. So within Salt Lake City, and under 60% for any rental assistance, 80% for any home buyer assistance.
And then, like I was mentioning with CDBG, this is if you're doing like one of those hard cost transportation projects I was talking about. This is the CDBG West Side target area for Salt Lake City. So it's kind of a funky map. Really, this is the census tracts of essentially the lowest income areas of Salt Lake City. So these arrows kind of point to the different bearings on the map. So 400 west here, 200 east, and then it goes down to 21st south, Redwood Road up to 3rd north. So this for kind of our annual programs. Again, if you're applying for a public services or a housing cost, you don't really need to worry about this. But if you're applying for like a transportation project, this is where you'll want to look at. Also, We have the facade grant. If you heard of that, those facade programs need to be located in here, but that's kind of an economic development, and that's a separate application process.
So we're going to talk about Zoomgrants and the process of actually applying for your programs. So all of the applications have to be completed and submitted online through Zoomgrants. There is the link again at our website. And if you don't have an if you don't have an account, then you'll have to create an account. And then you will just click on the apply button that's right next to the program and then complete and submit the application. So, and it saves as you go, so you don't have to complete it in one sitting. You can go back to it, but you do have to make sure that you hit that submit button so that it gets to us before November 1st. I think the next slide, yeah, so these slides and the PowerPoint, or sorry, the PDF of these slides were sent out in this meeting, and they are also available online, but these links will take you directly to the applications in Zoomgrants.
So yeah, like Amanda was just mentioning, this is a screenshot of if you're creating your Zoomgrants account for the first time. Essentially, you'll just have some pretty basic information to input, and then you can log in kind of at the top here. If you currently have an account, you are able to use just, a generic email that can be used by anyone in your agency. If you're the grant team for a specific agency, you're more than welcome to use your individual agency email. What I would recommend is that once you go in, you can include contributors or collaborators, and they're able to go in and edit the application, just in case like an emergency happens, you're out of town, like, I don't know, there's a natural disaster, you're not able to get your application in. That way, if you list a collaborator, so someone else on your grants team, admin team, anything like that, they're able to go in and continue the application. And so once you go in, it'll look similar to the left here. You'll see some open programs. It will be a different year. It'll say 22, 23, CDBG, Public Services, ESG, the Home HACWA, and Housing CDBG. But yeah, this is essentially what it'll look like. I would just highly encourage you to list a collaborator or contributor when you're going in and creating your account.
So this is what it'll look like when you first go into the application. It'll ask for your title, the amount that you're requesting, and then the applicant information and contact information. So this information is going to be carried across the entire application. So we just want to make sure that you're putting in correct information and information that can be, that's who we'll be reaching out to if we have any questions, not only in the application process, but also throughout the entire fiscal year if you do get awarded any funding. So make sure that that is correct and updated. And I believe there is an area to put secondary contacts as well. So really anyone who may touch this funding, make sure that you put their contact information in.
And then with application questions, you'll see the different tabs once you're going in. So essentially it jumps right into it. After you go into the program, after you've created your account, it'll just start kind of with the questions, like what type of agency are you? For the large majority of these grant funds, you do need to be a nonprofit agency. We do also allow Salt Lake City to apply for some funding. So technically, if the city applies for some funding, they need to meet the qualifications as well. They don't get any special access or anything. They have to go through the same public process. So, typically those are some of our hard cost dollars that the city also applies for. So that's why, there's the government public entity And then typically, if you are a private for-profit business, these grants are not available to you that we've been talking about. However, we do have specific grants like the Facade or Neighborhood Business Improvement Program that are available for private businesses. But typically, these grants are applied for just by nonprofits. So you'll give a mission statement of your agency, your impact vision statement. We just want to make sure that your nonprofit, your entity is serving low-income vulnerable individuals.
And then it'll go into the budget. So this is important so that we know if our funding is a portion of this project or if it's for the entire project that's being applied for. So any committed funds that you already have for that project, you'll put in the committed column. And then any non-committed, you'll put in the non-committed column, and that would include the request that you have in this award. So the committed and non-committed should add up to be your total amount that you're anticipating for the project or the program in the 2022-2023 fiscal year. So this kind of goes into the different screens that you'll see as well. So once you have completed the committed and non-committed columns, then it'll ask you to submit exactly how much of the total you will be using for what specific areas in your project. So this shows a total of 90,000, and then exactly what that 90,000 would be going to, indirect admin costs, salaries, direct client assistance, things like that. So you can break it out in as much detail as you want, and then that really gets ironed out during the contract process if funding is awarded. But this allows the reviewers and our boards to see exactly what the dollars will be going to and what part of the programs our funding will be going to. So I think this is just reiterating the fact that the totals need to match up. So that's what we'll be checking, making sure that these totals are matching and that it is committed versus non-committed, things like that. So we'll be checking that. And if we have any questions, again, we'll be contacting whoever is that main contact. So just be watching your email if we have any questions.
And so on funding uses and expenses on the budget tab, this is where you'll identify the specific line items that you would want to fund. So again, typically this is for programs that have been funded in the past. It would be like case manager, therapist, anything like that, salary, and then indirect administrative costs. We will talk a little bit more about that. And then you could have like client supplies. Technically, you only need one line item, but most just know you are able to put indirect administrative costs. The percentages vary by grant. So I would say technically a minimum of two. So it could be like X person at agency salary. It could be the client supplies. It could be like if you're a medical facility, a school facility, therapeutic facility, like it could be supplies you need to run the program. So like just depending on what you are, you would put those here. You don't need to break out every single thing if it kind of matches in a broader category. And then your indirect administrative costs. So yeah, identify the positions if you are applying for a position to be funded. So don't put the people, someone's done that in the past where they're like, Sally will be funded. Like, please just list the position in the agency, like therapist, case manager, desk staff, something like that. And then with the administrative caps, so for CDBG and home, that is 10% of your award. So hypothetically, say you're awarded $100,000, that means that you could use up to $10,000 for your administrative costs or indirect administrative costs. And then for ESG, it is 7.5%, and for HOPWA, it is 7%. And so these caps are set by HUD or Housing and Urban Development, so we have no control over those. So you can't exceed those unless you have a negotiated indirect cost rate from a federal agency. And again, we're not a part of that process. That's between you and the federal entity. So some agencies do have a higher admin cap, but it has to come from a federal entity. With your administrative caps, let us know if you have any questions, what can be used for it. I can speak for CDBG, it's pretty broad, but generally it's someone that's helping in the agency, but isn't inherently tied to the specific program. So that can be supplies like, again, paper for a printer. It could be, you know, part of someone in the admin or grants team salary. It could be an accountant's partial salary because they're helping submit reimbursement requests. So feel free to ask us questions about what you can use for those administrative costs, but generally they're pretty broad other than you can't exceed the cap on those.
And when it comes to beneficiaries, this is just how Salt Lake City does it. If you do put in an anticipated beneficiaries number and then showing what the Salt Lake City specific funding request is versus the total program budget, we'll just do this calculation to figure out the percent and then do that same percentage towards your total beneficiaries. So that's how we calculate the Salt Lake City beneficiaries to make sure that the funding amount is relative to how many beneficiaries will be served with our funding. So that's how we calculate it on the back end. If you calculate it in a different way, or if there's a different sort of beneficiary type of program that you run, then we would just want that explained in the application, because this is how we would look at it typically. And then we would also, if your award is less than what you applied for, then we would decrease those beneficiaries relative to how much your award is decreased from your ask based on these calculations as well. So.
And I'll add one thing, because I've gotten a couple questions about this. Your beneficiaries, so granted we are Salt Lake City, but they don't inherently all have to be Salt Lake City residents. Kind of like we mentioned, some of the grants are broader to the county, where CDBG is specific to the city. However, there's a lot of entities that serve people throughout Salt Lake County. You're still more than welcome to apply. It's just for if it's a grant like CDBG that does need to be used to fund Salt Lake City residents, you're able to see clients from wherever, but for the reimbursement request that you would bill to us, you would charge client costs that were Salt Lake City residents, if that makes sense. So yeah, let us know if you have any questions with that on beneficiaries. And then Zoomgrants documents, we have several different documents that are available on Zoomgrants. Some of them are just kind of a for-your knowledge. If you want to read HUD documentation and policy, they're a lot of fun. They're on there to read. You don't have to read those to apply. We encourage you to kind of skim maybe the first couple pages, make sure you're fine with that. There are reporting requirements with these grants, such as quarterly reports, and then we operate on a reimbursement request basis. But then there are several documents that are required. So this, like, it will specify if it's required. So things like board members, again, we're ensuring that you are a qualified nonprofit. And then there are some forms that are on there that if you are funded, you'll need to sign. So you don't inherently need to sign. So a lot of those are civil rights documents. You don't need to sign those now. You're welcome to skim them. But for example, all these federal grants are dictated by federal law. And so, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Violence Against Women Act, the Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights Act, all those are laws that are all these grants have to meet the qualifications of those laws. So, for example, you're agreeing to things like ADA protections, civil rights protections, etc. So just be aware, if you are funded, you do have to follow those.
And then there's also the library tab that is part of the application, and that has a lot of resources. Again, like Ethan was saying, some really good HUD reading is in there. Our master plans and the consolidated plan, which you have to fall within the consolidated plan and eligibility of the programs as well. So that's in there if you want to do some light reading, not too much in there. And then yeah, so that is where that is. It's in the library. If you have any questions on any of those documents, again, reach out and we can help you out to see how your program might fit.
So this is a cool map that overlays essentially how the process works. So on November 1st, once the applications are due, all of us on this call in the capital planning team with housing stability, we'll start reviewing all the applications. So we're the grant administrators. So essentially what we're doing is make sure that they meet federal compliance. Again, those laws I mentioned, civil rights laws, that they meet all eligible HUD criteria, and that you're eligible. So for example, that you're not in serving clients in St. George, for example. And then we're going to start scoring them based on an administrative review. And then we have 2 resident advisory boards. So these are made up of current residents of Salt Lake City that very generously volunteer their time and energy for 2 to 3 months or so review these grants. And then they're really the first step in that public process, and they make the recommendations. They then score them and make the recommendations to the mayor and the city council of what they would like to see funded. And so with the 2 citizen advisory boards, so there's the CDCIP board and the Housing Trust Fund board, or HTF board, we do have a general needs hearing. So in the past, that's where members of the public are able to voice any concerns. So typically in the past, it's like, that we really need more funding for vulnerable clients based on X, Y, like kind of depending on what individuals are concerned about in the city. The members of those advisory boards take all those comments, and then they keep those in mind while they're reviewing the applications. One of the things we weren't able to do last year, but we're pretty hopeful we can do this year, is called nano sessions. We call it kind of like speed dating, where you meet with members of the board and you have like a 2-minute overview to kind of give your elevator speech of what your program does, how it serves vulnerable clients. It's a really good way, especially if you're a new applicant or an applicant that hasn't applied for a long time, to kind of explain the great work that your agency's doing to the board members, because there's so many great nonprofits in the community, but sometimes it isn't clear to the board members what you're doing. And so they love to hear like how your program works, if they funded you, how many clients you would be able to serve, and again, the deficiencies that would be fixed by this funding. Like, there's X unmet need, and if you fund me, we could serve this many people. And then they make their recommendations. It goes then to the mayor. She will review them as well, and then make her recommendations. And then it goes to the city council, which is the final step in the process. The city council also has a public hearing. As an agency, you are welcome to attend that and advocate for your agency. Members of the public attend that as well, and they're like, we really like the work that this nonprofit's doing. This is why it's a great agency. The city council then makes final recommendations, and then essentially that's who will get funding. And then after that, we will reach out to you and kind of circle up with some final approval stuff. But yeah, so this is kind of the process that we're outlaying in the beginning. With this, after November 1st, the resident advisory boards will start reviewing those applications. And then in the spring sometime, the city council will recommend for final funding. And then the program year will start July 1st.
Okay, like I mentioned before, the the consolidated plan, is also something that we look at to make sure that applications are eligible. So not only do they have to be eligible at the federal level with each program, but then we also have to go off of our con plan that we submitted through HUD to make sure that we are serving the correct populations that we said we would be serving, and also the different targets that we put in our con plan. So that is available. I think the next slide has what those priorities are and goals. Yes. Okay. So these are the objectives and outcomes identified in the plan: housing, transportation, build community resiliency, homeless services, and behavioral health. So if your program falls in any of these, that would then make it eligible on the Salt Lake City end as well. And if they aren't eligible based on these, then we'll let you know that as well. If you do apply and then for whatever reason you are found ineligible, then we will let you know why exactly that is. But they go into more detail in the con plan, but this is a really good overview of these. I'm not going to read exactly what they are because they're on this slide. Yeah, so these are the main outcomes identified. And one thing I did want to remind everyone in the application process is, like Ethan said, they are going through community boards. So an important thing to do in the application is really explain what your program is. Even if you've been getting these funds for 15 years or 1 year, clarity is really important so that the community advisory boards can read your application, know exactly what it is you're doing and how you're using that funding, because they really are making the first recommendations. And so the more clear that you can be, the more explaining your acronyms, explaining exactly what different terms are that you're doing within your program is really helpful. And it also creates less back and forth for us if they have questions, and then we reach out to you, and it just makes everything a little bit more simpler and easier for the community boards to understand as they go through the applications.
Amanda, can I put in a plug for consistency as well? Because then the boards are excellent at basically going through the applications and finding inconsistencies. So if somewhere in the application you put down that last year you served X amount of individuals, and then later in the application you say last year we served X amount of individuals, if those numbers are off, they'll catch it. So clarity and consistency as much as possible for these resident advisory boards.
Did you have anything else on this, Amanda?
Nope. We can go to the next slide.
Cool. And then so this slide looks like a lot of words, but I'll try to give a good overview, kind of what we've just been describing and what Tony just mentioned as well. This is what the boards will be looking at. So for example, we will also be looking at, and this is essentially the first step, is does it meet HUD's eligibility requirements? Does it meet civil rights thresholds, things like that? And then does it clearly apply with a stated objective in the consolidated plan? After, I'm happy to kind of go to a little bigger screen of the consolidated plan if that's helpful. And then again, that was sent out in the email. So if you have any particular questions, does our program fit within one of these? It is pretty broad if you're serving low income or vulnerable individuals. So feel free to reach out to us if you're like, we're not sure, and we can go through that with you. And then does it serve one or more of those target populations identified in the consolidated plan? You just need to meet one of those goals, but if you meet more than one, that's great. And then what the boards will be looking at is how does it further the goals of the consolidated plan? And then so they'll also be looking at like timelines, complexity of the program, financial stability and responsibility. So the boards are very particular about, you know, have you had to repay grant funding in the past, and why? So if you have had to, that's not necessarily the end of the likelihood that you get funded. You should just be able to explain what's happened, and how your agency is adjusted to that and how you've course corrected, because they'll appreciate the honesty and, you know, just showing what you've learned as an agency. And because managing federal grants can be a little complex, but we're available to help in that process as well. And we're always happy to do technical assistance. Then the application will also ask about key staff turnover. So that's if anyone in your administration is left, they'll just want to know, like, kind of a brief overview of that, management systems. Can your agency carry out this program? Will you be able to complete the project in the fiscal year? And then what are the strengths of the program outcomes? And so really with that, you want to be able to clearly lay out what your program is doing and then furthermore, if you get funding, what your program will be able to do. And so sometimes, obviously you're not able to see in the future, but outline, like, we believe we'll be able to serve this many more vulnerable individuals with this funding. Here's how we'll be able to grow this program with this funding, things like that.
Okay, so if you have any questions, you can ask them here. This is some time for that, but also if you have specific program related questions, feel free to reach out in email, or you can go through Zoomgrants by clicking on the Contact Admin tab. And the last day to submit questions regarding these applications to the Salt Lake City is Wednesday, October 27th at noon. That way we have plenty of time to get back to you and there's no last minute questions that we're rushing around with. I did want to just reiterate something that was dropped in the chat. So Becca said collaborators cannot submit applications in Zoomgrants. So if you are having collaborators join you in those applications, the main contact, the main application email login is the one who has to actually click that submit button. So in case that question comes up at the last minute, that is there. And then again, applications have to be submitted through Zoomgrants by Monday, November 1st, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Does anybody have, oh, and here's our contact information. And you can also find that on the website, but we also want to open it up. I think this is the last slide, right?
Can we actually go back to the slide with the deadline? So we just want to reiterate too. So we do get a lot of questions, especially towards when the applications are due. So Amanda and Ethan are superheroes, but they can't do everything. So it's basically, this is our way of saying that if you get us a question by this deadline for October 27th by noon, we will guarantee that we will follow up with you with a response. Afterwards, we cannot guarantee that we will follow up with you with a response by the deadline date. So this is a good nudge for everyone to try to get your application in, get all your questions in as soon as possible, so that way you're not kind of left in limbo. We do know that there's a lot that circulates in an agency with questions between the program, between the budget, etc. And so we always just put a plug in there too, just to get that all wrapped up and taken care of as soon as possible. Ethan, Rob dropped a question in the chat. Would you like to answer that? And again, please note, there are no dumb questions. Please, please, please ask as many questions as possible. We are here to help and support.
Can you see the question, Ethan?
I just stopped sharing, so
okay.
Now I can see it.
I can just ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ethan, the panel that's going to be reviewing it, I'm curious. I know some people have different groups of people that read the different sections. They have specialties maybe, or I don't know. That's really the question is, do we need to act as if it's a different group of people reading each section, re-explain acronyms, re-explain anything that we may have explained in another part of the application?
So if you, for example, with your acronyms, if you describe those at the beginning, then you're able to use them throughout the application. You don't need to keep re-explaining because every board member, so it's about 8 to 12 members for our two boards. They're made up of different individuals. So again, CDCIP reviews CDBG and ESG, and then Housing Trust Fund reviews home and HOPWA. They do review every question individually. So it will just be those handful of individuals that are reviewing all the questions. So if you explain the acronyms at the beginning, then use them for, we do have a character limit, so feel free to use the acronyms after they're explained. But every member of the board will review every question and every application, yes.
Thank you.
And then I saw January has a question. She's asking about the RFP open. When does the RFP open to start applying for the 22-23? So this is for the annual ESG funding. I know you mentioned ESG round 2 in your question, which I believe is COVID related dollars. So this is completely separate from COVID or American Rescue Plan. This is the annual allocation that we get every year, and that application is open right now. So it opened up October 1st and it closes November 1st. So if you have any questions on these applications, reach out to us. ESG is pretty much this, it's really similar to the CV dollars, how it can be used. There's just certain things that CV had exemptions for. So you can still apply for similar programs that you did with your CV dollars, but you don't have to put in any coronavirus related things. If there are any impacts that you've experienced through coronavirus, then that's also important to put in your applications. If you're suddenly asking for more money or suddenly asking for less money because there's so much money out there right now, that is really helpful to put in the application as well, though.
And just to kind of build upon a little bit more what Amanda was just saying too, yeah, that ESG round 2 was ESG CV from the county, not the city. And we know that a lot of you do apply for other funding sources from our regional partners, including the county and the state. So we're always the first ones. The county they open up their applications sometime in November, and then the state opens up their stuff usually in January or February. So just kind of watch for that. I also kind of put in a quick pro tip as well of, we all know that you guys do amazing work with your agencies, but please try to limit and be very specific with your introduction to your agency and just kind of go, we are amazing, we are wonderful, we have a huge impact in the community, and we do all these wonderful things, and make it very simple at the very beginning. And then the rest of the application, please make sure that you're being very specific to the exact program that you're applying for, program or project. So kind of make that distinction of like, yes, we are fantastic, we are wonderful as an agency, and this is all the wonderful things we do. But for being specifically for this application, this project, this program for the city, this is the detail that we are going to explain.
And I'll just throw something out, Billy, on what Tony just said. Have gone this question in the past, is an agency you are eligible to apply for our other regional partners federal funding as well. So for example, you can apply for CDBG with the city, with the county, and the state. So we do collaborate together. Just know we can't fund the exact same activity. So there does need to be some variance in the activity that's being funded, but you are able to get grants from each of those entities. And we would encourage you, if your agency needs that funding, to look into when those applications open as well with the county and the state. And I'm going to do a cool plug really quick. We have a community engagement survey. This is something that we give to the two resident advisory boards to review as well. So if I put the survey in the chat, with that survey, that's also another thing that the boards use to be like, kind of what are people in the community saying? We welcome agencies and their staff to take it. We open it to residents. Technically anyone can take it, and if you're doing any sort of work in the community as an agency, you're welcome to rank your priorities the highest. And then it's however you feel like what should be funded. And then also these results do go to the mayor and the city council. And because the funds are so competitive, we encourage you all to apply, but unfortunately, we always wish we got more funding to give to this, but just keep that in mind as the boards and then the mayor and the council are kind of deciding these things. That's why we have a few different factors, so they can get to know you with the micro sessions, why there's that general needs hearing, and why there's this community engagement survey. So you're more than welcome to take that, spread it around your agency, and those results go to everyone who reviews these as well.
I did just have one more thing to say about the application process. So just a reminder that you can apply for multiple programs through one application link. So for example, most of our links have more than one HUD program associated with them. So you can go through that same link, apply for CDBG program services, and apply for ESG with the same contact information, the same agency information. You can apply as many times as you want with any of those programs. So if you have a cool new program that you want to apply for funding for and still also apply for the same program that you've been running for a while, you can do that. You can apply for multiple programs at home, ESG, CDBG, anything like that. Are there any other questions?
And I threw our consolidated plan into the chat. It is a pretty big document, but if you go to page 8, there are our objectives and outcomes. So the housing, transportation, community resiliency, homeless services, and behavioral health laid out further. So some of them have several bullet points. Again, that's what we were talking about. If you aren't sure if your program meets one of those thresholds to be eligible for our funding, review that on page 8 on there. And again, we're available for any questions with that as well. But it's pretty broad and flexible. So as long as you meet one of those.
Hey, Ethan, can you throw up the slide again with your contact information? And Amanda, yeah. Emily dropped in a good question.
Yeah, so Emily asked the estimated amount of funding available for the city this year through these funds. We do have that amount in the application in Zoomgrants. It is anticipated, so I believe we put, Ethan, if you want to talk to CDBG and HOPWA, what our anticipated dollars are, but for ESG, we're anticipating around 300,000, and there is a 60% cap for emergency services, which is the emergency shelter and street outreach part of that. And then for home, we're expecting about 1.2 million to go into home programs. Ethan, do you want to talk about CDBG and HOPWA amounts?
Yeah, so CDBG is our biggest pot. We're still figuring out the exact amount because we do have some reclaim funding. So if you're doing one of those housing acquisition, housing rehabilitation, transportation projects, we'll have over 5 million, between the range of 5 to 6 million. We're still working on, there's a couple projects that we're wrapping up that essentially any program that isn't used during a fiscal year, that money's reclaimed by us and put in the application for the following year. So we're still figuring out that exact amount. So, and then with that, our public services portion is capped at 15% of our CDBG award. So I would say anticipate in the range of 500,000 to 600,000 available for that. That's the one that, again, typically pays for client supplies, staff positions. And then HOPWA will be in the $600,000 to $700,000 range as well. So we haven't gotten our exact award letters from HUD. Hypothetically, we could get a little more. This funding is allocated by Congress, and then HUD works out the exact formulas based on Salt Lake City's population. So we're always kind of excited to see what we get as well. Salt Lake's growing, so maybe we'll get a little more, but we generally give the numbers that we received last year just kind of is a safe threshold. And then if we get more, the boards and the mayor and the council have more to allocate. Any other questions? And yeah, if you're a returning applicant, haven't applied in a few years, if you're a new applicant, we love new and returning applicants as much as we love our recurring applicants. So we're happy to have a quick digital meeting with you on Teams and your team just to go over some of the stuff we've been talking about, as long as it's before the 27th. And so, yeah, if you're confused about something in the Zoomgrants process and the application process, about if your program's eligible and would this be a good program, we're available for questions like that. Cool. So if there's no other questions, just reach out to us with that contact info, and then we'll call it a day on this. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining.